Thanks, Bonnie. Okay, I want you to open in that passage, the end of Joshua 5 and into chapter 6. So this is an opportunity for Israel. They get to take the car out of the garage and really put it on the racetrack, drive it around a couple times, get the engine heated up, see what the performance looks like. They've crossed the river Jordan, and they're in that place where there's really no going back. Remember, it's still at flood stage, so they decided to retreat. As they needed God's help to get over, they would need God's help to get back. And that's not what's in the cards for them. They're ready to take on the formidable challenge of the walls of Jericho. And you've all heard the song, they come tumbling down. You know the end of the story. Here's my concern with what we know about Jericho. We know kind of a Sunday school version of this story, which isn't bad, okay? But it's really not the whole thing. This is a powerful story meant for folks who are in that place in their lives where all of a sudden God's got to show up. And every step of the way in this story shows that. So here's my question for you, kind of get you warmed up, get you ready for this. What is our true source for living? And once again, I'm just going to encourage you to back away from the Sunday school answer. Jesus is our true power for living. I know what you could say. I know what you might think. I even know what the right answer is. In fact, I just said it. But what do you really do? When crunch time happens, it's happening in real time. What do you reach for? What do you grab hold of at first? Most of us get to Jesus, okay? But I believe that there's a kind of a way that we get there, because all of a sudden our brain, our reflexes, something else happens, and we're going to respond, right? And that's what I want you to get a hold of. Joshua and Israel this week are reminded, given a reminder and a demonstration as to how God works in the lives of people who recognize the need of God in everything. Okay? And that's what this is all about. And we get to see that too. We get to see that reminder as we read this story. We get to see the demonstration of that power. So our story starts with this odd encounter. Joshua's kind of circling the camp. You can imagine someone in charge of all those people, and he's just thinking about, this is all going to happen. We're going to test this thing in a huge battle that is about ready to take place. So if you're familiar with or can get in touch with some kind of huge or not so huge battle, some place in your life right now where God is sending you, and you're thinking, I'm not so sure, or how's that going to work? Now then, Joshua was near Jericho. He looked up and he saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Now, I'm thinking that the presence of this guy is imposing, at least. Maybe even a little bit spiritually kind of almost angelic, but it's powerful. A big guy with a big sword. Okay? It's enough to kind of... And Joshua asks this simple question, are you for us or for our enemies? That's a great question. You know, a big dude with a big sword. Whose side be you on? Right? Just so we know. I love the answer. The big guy with the big sword says, neither. Just want to stop there for a minute. That's really an interesting answer, isn't it? And I just want you to focus on that for just a minute. Take note that God is on the side of your enemy. You know that? Let's just dial it in. Okay, let's Google Maps. DMZ, North Korea. God is for North Korea right now. Did you know that? You see, God's hope. I got you this. God's hope is that we get so full of God and so full of compassion that we as missionaries would die on a cross for North Koreans as Jesus died on a cross for us. Huge step right now for a lot of people, a lot of fear-based people. God's prayer is that the missionaries get there before the nukes do, in the modern context of the Lord. So this big dude with the big sword says neither. Just want you to know what this is all about. Just want you to get an understanding that this is our source, and this is God's revelation to us, right here and right now. Neither. He replied. But the commander, he's still talking, but as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come. Notice what Joshua does now. He sticks it, a perfect face plant in the desert sand. Face down, on the ground, in reverence. And you kind of have to get this because he's talking out of the sand. And what message would you have for me, sir? Right? Yeah. What message would you have for me? And this is what he says. God's revelation is calculated, but really strange. He goes, I want your shoes. That's all I want. I want your shoes. You wanted me to explain that? Yes. So when you live over there, your shoes aren't much. But they're very important. That little bit of leather that goes under your feet is going to protect it from all the thorns and all that hot sand. In fact, the only people who don't have shoes over there are slaves. I want you as my servant. I want to take the last of your self-protection and all the self-sufficiency and affluence and everything you think you have. I want you to toss it at my feet and let me be your God.
Yes.
Give me your shoes. I don't want your righteousness. I don't need your credit score. Not looking for your GPA. Dana done us well. She got on the dean's list at North Park College. Amen. But God ain't looking for that. He wants Dana's basketball shoes. Right? Says, I don't even want you to get those 2 or 3 points every game that you got this season. I want everything that you count as gold, that you trust in, every single source you have. Kick them off and give them to me. I want you. I want you. And almost, it's almost there. It all of a sudden it becomes intimate. I want you. Wow. That's the revelation. Joshua, well, who are you? And the revelation is, I'm God, and what are you going to do about it? Are you going to let me be God? Or am I just a God of your theology or your dreams, or when you're done with the 2 or 3 things that you thought you were going to do to fix the mess, and now you're going to do it? I want to be your God. And so Joshua's response, as we've seen already, is a perfect face plant. He falls on his feet before the Lord. He gives up his shoes. There's two common sense mistakes that we make with God on almost a weekly basis. I've been on about a 2-week roll of mistakes myself. Woo! Common sense mistake number 1. Does God work for me, or am I working for God? Ooh. Uppity pastor, 23 years. You think I work for you? You're still working for me. You've got to be checking in with me. You've got to be asking me how this works. I'm letting all that stuff happen so you'll recognize that I'm still on the planet and you still need me, and you always will, even when you get to heaven. You're just going to like it better. Appreciate Steve, 23 years of laughing at the things that I think are funny and you think are funny and no one else did. Just love it. Thank you. When was the last time that you fell on your face before God and you washed your shoes? Like I said, things haven't been going really well, but I don't know everything. I got acquainted with that again. But here's what I know. Every single mistake, God redeems. It says you couldn't have learned the lesson any other way, son. Way to go, good and faithful servant. Says if you figure out some way to hotwire your mistakes, make sure no one saw you trip on the street and get up real quick. If you figured out some kind of way that your mistakes don't matter or no one knows about them, God says, too bad. Because those were all the kinds of things I wanted to teach you through. That's all the stuff that I wanted to really reveal myself to you through. And so I learned this week that I am less certain of my certainties, and I am more certain of my uncertainty than I've ever been before. You know, that's really dyslexic. Steve didn't even laugh that time.
I understand.
Yeah. Because only God is certain, and not the ways to God, not the avenues. And until God gets all of our shoes off and everything out of the way, and somehow we're in that position where our face is down, we're not going to get it. So once that happens, now that the source has been revealed and we've responded, the foolishness begins. That's not a typo, is it, Laura? It's the foolishness right there. Yeah, okay. It's the foolishness. God commands our strength. Listen to this in verse 6. Now Jericho was tightly shut up because of the Israelites. No one went in, or no one went out, no one came in. Then the Lord said to Joshua, see, I've delivered the city to you. No way! He's looking at the largest fortified city that they've seen since Egypt 40 years ago. All kinds of big, ugly dudes on the top of the wall with just terrible things to throw down on them if they would get close. And huge catapults in the back to fire. I mean, this is a little boy's dream of calamity and fire and war and crazy stuff. And God says to Joshua, see, it's all yours. And he's going, what? As his knees buckle. That's what he saw. Remember, you know the end of the story. Don't you wish you knew the end of your story from this week's tribulations? But you don't, so you're... And that's where they're at. They don't know the end of this story. That's one fierce fort. It's huge. It's big. And they're just all these little guys. They don't... Well, it gets better. You know the story now from here. Here's what I want you to do. You're gonna get this because you're gonna go for 6 days. You're gonna walk around the thing for 6 days. I put all the God in a box stuff in this thing called the Ark of the Covenant. You're gonna carry that, and you got 7 guys with horns, and they're gonna walk behind you. And then when it's all over, you're going to do this. Blah! And the walls are going to fall down. And Joshua says, no way. That's crazy. Don't you got some big bombs or some cannons? Or can't we release the lions or something, God? Got some dragons or something? And that's what he tells them to do. That's how you're going to do it. You see, God's command can only be understood in terms of our obedience. Are we childlike enough to obey something so foolish, so risky, so stupid, in terms of men and women, that God would show up and show up? So out there, so far out there, that when it all happens, there's no response other than, whoa, look at what God did. So let me read this. I like to call it, it's called by another name, but I like to call it, don't give up on your life in Christ. Okay? Quit living as if the purpose of your life is to arrive safely at death. Set God-sized goals. Pursue God-given passions. Go after a dream. Go after a dream that is destined to fail without divine intervention. I mean, do the impossible. Stop pointing at the problem. Become part of the solution. Stop repeating the past. Start creating a future. Face your fears. Fight for your dreams. Grab the opportunity. Don't let go. Live like today is the first day of the rest of your life. Burn your sinful bridges. Blaze new trails. Live for the applause of the nail-scarred hand. We're not done. Don't let what's wrong with you keep you from worshiping what's right with God. Well, you know, we had a clock thing happen this morning. But you just suppose with me for 3 seconds and don't go any further, you'll get the wrong move. How many people do you know that could be here this morning are not here because stuff's going on in their life and they don't think they deserve church or that it will make a difference? I didn't want to come to church this morning. Didn't feel like it at all. God says, I'll give you a chance at that in a few more weeks. Still not done. Dare to fail. Dare to be different. Quit holding out. Quit holding back. Quit running away. Just charge towards the foolishness of chasing the lion, grabbing it by the tail. Because God says, you win if you do. I'll figure out a way if you win if you don't, too, because I'm going to give you another chance at that. But you really win if you do. So cooperation is found in the last part of this verse, and it's too long to read over and over again. But just so you know, they did everything that God told them to do, right? And in the power of all of that happening, it became evident to them. But just let me show you one more thing about our self-doubt and why it's true and why it's not true, okay? And it goes something like this. They went out there and they blew the horns and they went, blah! I had to do that one more time. That was just so much fun. I might do it one more time, but 2 at least. And everything fell down. See, it looked to their enemies like that's all it took. In fact, the Israelites probably felt like, we bad. We got this. And they ran in there and they just tore it up. God hides his power under the pillow of your self-doubt. That's where it's at. When you're thinking that you can't, God says, they're ready now. All I needed was them to not try to fix this, not try to manipulate it, not try to get to the next place. All I needed was for them to take the power, to understand that lifting up their pillow, it's not the tooth fairy, it's not a quarter, unbelievable what my kids give my grandkids for a tooth. Oh my gosh, I'm thinking about losing some teeth. It's hidden there in your self-doubt. All we got to say is yes. To extremely, you can think it out all you want, and every time you're going to get to, no way, this doesn't add up, I look stupid. Or you could say, way. Okay, God, your way. And it goes from there. I do love this verse at the end. It says, So the Lord was with Joshua, and his fame spread throughout the land. And you want to know why that was? Just rise up to verse 25. But, anytime you see a but, you're going to see something good. 1T. Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute. By the way, every time she's mentioned, she's going to be Rahab the prostitute. Did you get that? This is the 30 times great-grandmother of Jesus, of all things. But she will always show up at a 12-step meeting going, I'm Rahab the prostitute. Because that's what she was saved from. And check it out. Joshua gets saved, saving her. And the children of Israel get saved not by the pretension of their power and their might and their Bible study and their big parking lots and everything else that they think they can build. He's saved because they made a promise to an insignificant person, and they swept her up, and guess what? It says she lives in Israel today. She's in the house. She's in your seat. She's preaching from this pulpit. It's our glad rags, and we have nothing. But our glad God gives us everything. The whole thing. Wow. Don't you want that? There's a word in here, by the way, and just kind of have to get to it before we close this up. There's a word in here, verse 17, and the city and all that is in it is to be devoted to the Lord. Verse 18. Nothing shall be spared because, she shall be spared because she hid the spies. Verse 18, but keep away from the devoted things. Verse 21, they devoted the city to the Lord. The devoted things, this is a wonderful Hebrew word called the harim. The harim is the devoted things. And everything that is devoted is unequivocally, completely, totally God, and his lordship is on top of it. And he does two things with the devoted things. He takes everything devoted and he destroys it utterly, or he puts it into his treasury. Okay? So all the bangles and the baubles and all the shiny stuff, they collected that, but everything else, scorched earth. And we're going to talk about whether that's God's judgment always next week. I raise this up because this is going to be important, because we just started this story. You want to read ahead next week and still come to church? Great. Just don't read it and come to church, and you'll be fine. Okay? The devoted things were the things that were set apart, the things made holy, and they were either destroyed or saved by God, not by us, which gives power and great weight to something that we often hear ourselves say to one another or to ourselves, such as, what are you really devoted to? To the degree that you would save it for no use of your own, but only God's, or you would destroy it, burn it, bury it. How devoted. Another way of putting this is, what is your desire? And how powerful do your desires rule over everything else? We'll talk about that next week. What is your holiest, your deepest desire? So cooperation is God's power and our participation. When we recognize God's power and serve and worship and remember the glory of God. Our cooperation is when our difficulty meets God, and it turns into opportunity. It's that intersection where our surrender to God creates an openness to the things of God. So, just something else that I read this week, and I think it's important. It says this, we do not attain anything by our own holiness, which is to say, by the way, that we don't make ourselves holy. Only God does that, right? So that's why that doesn't work. But so to finish the sentence, we do not attain anything by our own holiness, but by 10,000 surrenders to mercy. I don't know if you've thought about this that much, but I've been thinking about this for quite a while, that spiritual growth is not an ascension, it's a descension. It's not places where I get another, New Testament merit badge and a couple of Old Testament merit badges and I put it all together. It's being able to surrender my life to God at every single crisis so I begin to see God as I do that. So here's what I want you to do. Didn't even do this last service, so a couple of you folks in the back row from the first service that came to this service, you're in luck. This is great. Where am I or am I not surrendered to God? You think you could just take a moment and look at it, just one or two places in your life where you know you're surrendered to God. But also one or two places where you're not surrendered at all. And you know that. And you know that God knows that. You know that God knows that you know that God knows that you know. And this has been a place for you for a long time. The power of God becomes released in our lives when we open our hearts in this special way that only we can. And that God enters at the place of our weakness, at the place where we don't do it right, at the place of our least perfections. And then we go, okay, God, so what are you doing? God shows us, and it begins to show itself and work itself out. That's what's happening in Jericho. That's the point and the piece to all of this that's taking place. And that's the way, too, in which God wants to join our lives with His power and pull that hidden resource out of you so that we can go forward in the way that God's called us. Jesus, I thank you that the power is known to you and that in the midst of all the things that we find ourselves in,